Hello, and welcome to the Marble Security Podcast. My name's Dave Jevons, and I'm the host of the program. I'm joined today by Ryan Noonan, our Senior Security Analyst. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be here on our last podcast of the 2013 year.
Yep, December 2013, and it's time for our top 10 security and cybercrime predictions for the coming year for 2014. Today we're going to discuss everything from threats in BYOD and mobile to cybercrime, privacy and NSA, and we'll end, of course, with one of our favorite pet topics, a little bit of discussion of Bitcoin.
I can't wait. Let's get started.
So one of my top predictions is that the bring your own device phenomenon is going to become very widespread and really gain a lot of momentum in corporate America, in large companies. I think we're going to see a lot of this being driven by cost savings, where companies don't want to be buying Android tablets and iPads for their employees. They'd rather save the money and let them bring it in themselves. There's also been some studies that show that employees using their own mobile devices are up to 20% more efficient when working remotely than when using corporate-issued devices, because they're looking at their personal email as well as their corporate email. So I think that's going to drive a big increase in BYOD, but I also think we're going to face a whole new set of security threats in those mixed device environments. What do you think?
Oh, I totally agree. I think whenever you have someone bringing their own device that is not provisioned and locked down by a security expert, perhaps their local administrator, you are going to see some deviation in the patterns of usage. They'll be more productive perhaps, but without that little bit of control, there's no vetting mechanism to tell the user what they're going to have on their device and when they're not going to. So in that case, the person's device may be in an unknown risky state, which of course would tie back into the idea of BYOD being good for productivity, but pretty risky from a security perspective.
Yeah, and that's where companies like Marble come in.
Absolutely.
Shameless plug. Let's talk a little bit about the second prediction, which is mobile application security in particular. I believe that we're going to see an increase in the number of apps that are risky for people to use inside of company networks or when they're accessing company information on their devices. And I think we're going to have an increased understanding of those risks. I think CIOs and chief security officers don't necessarily have a great understanding of what apps, that are supposedly legitimate might be exposing as far as risk around corporate data exposure, address book exposures, which then can lead into APTs.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. This last 2013, we were seeing many apps that were in innocuous as flashlights, which we covered in the previous podcast, which were stealing contact information. It's nice to hear that, and I agree with you, that more people will be more intelligent about the apps they provide, or rather the apps they allow on their networks. But, they're going to need that technology behind that for application scanning and actions the apps want to have on the device. So, yes, I do agree with you that people have a better idea on those, and there will be more risky apps that are being sent out under less innocuous terms.
Yeah, I also predict that apps that are trying to monetize themselves through advertising networks are going to look to find other ways to monetize themselves, because just having little banner ads inside of apps only works for certain types of apps. There's lots of developers not making much money off of that. And I think marketplaces, for example, slurped up corporate address books will definitely be there. I mean, the mobile equivalent of Jigsaw, which is, sales guys use all the time to find leads from other sales guys who upload people's business cards into the system.
Yeah, that's totally true. For myself, I don't even see the banner ads anymore. It's gotten to the point where if they're there, I don't notice them. So you're right. They're going to have to find new and better ways to get their marketing data. And to me, it's pretty scary thinking that I can have an employee that's running Angry Birds or some other random game that then takes all the contact information, even the phone numbers. Those are coveted pieces of information, especially from marketers. I would predict that the next step is they would be watching where you go with your browser, who's calling you during that time, and then sending that information up, like the metadata that we're hearing about the NSA being used for marketing purposes in the background as opposed to being an in-your-face banner ad.
Yeah. My prediction number 3 is we're going to see more phishing sites that are targeted specifically at mobile devices. Today, the majority of phishing sites are looking at effectively desktop environments. They're expecting you to visit it by clicking on an email and going to the site through Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Safari. But we're starting to see more and more targeted at mobile devices with the ability to sense that you're visiting them from an Android device or an iOS device and displaying appropriate content that way, and also delivery of the messages through the SMS channels. I think that's going to increase significantly in 2014.
Yep, I agree. SMS is a big one. I don't think many people are trained yet to think of SMS as a message that may contain spam. I know for myself, I use a fairly cheap phone carrier. I'm not going to just send the name, but they send me advertisements all the time. However, I have friends who use some of the larger carriers, and they hardly ever get an advertisement for anything on their phone where they haven't been trained not to treat the messages that get pushed through SMS seriously, or
as possibly as a threat, right?
As possibly a threat. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, they don't see it as a possible threat or an advertisement, so they may get a message from some random person with a link and follow it. It may even be spoofed. We're seeing an increase in messages being sent with false headers and phone numbers where they may think it's their grandma, their friend that says, hey, check out this site, log in, there's a gift for you. And meanwhile, they steal the username and password.
Right. Well, let's move on to prediction number 4. And I believe we are going to see an increase in the use of attacks against mobile users as advanced persistent threat vectors. I think we're going to see jailbroken and rooted phones with jammers on them that prevent detection of those phones being jailbroken or rooted inside of corporate networks from traditional static MDM products. And typically now, when you break a phone, an SSH server is pretty much configured by default, which basically is a nice backdoor into the system. Further, I believe that we're going to see a lot of these side-loaded apps which are out there, either only available for jailbroken phones, or you can load them on an Android phone very easily. You don't have to root your phone. And I think for sure we're going to see a number of apps out there that include backdoors so that when a person takes that phone with that app into a network, it'll allow people to log into the phone remotely, and it will also have scanners on the phone that will start scanning the interior of corporate networks and finding out what network they're on, is it of interest, and then making that device available for attackers who want to come in and break into the company.
Yeah, sure. You're dropping a Linux server onto your network. I mean, of course we're going to see that. I totally agree. I think a second part of that, which is a small tangent, is we're not only going to see the devices do that, but we're also going to see targeted attacks, perhaps SSH authentication attempts where they use the default password for rooted devices, assuming that many users, they just go to their buddy, get their phone rooted. They don't change the root password. So I would expect a lot of SSH traffic with people trying to authenticate to these phones over the next year.
Yeah, I'm going to have a little side project this year looking at devices attached to Wi-Fi networks and see which ones I can find SSH servers running on. I've had some initial success already in the early stages of that research. So our number 5 prediction for security trends and threats in 2014 is an increase in Wi-Fi attacks as people are using their mobile devices and their laptops on more and more Wi-Fi networks that they don't control.
This is one of my favorites. What I love is people who have little devices and they have data plans. So they're always looking out for the Wi-Fi to save a little bit of money. So they connect to any old thing because that's where they want to do their data. They want to get on the web. They want to check their email, etc. But they don't want to pay the man money for it. So this has become a big one. Anyone could set up a malicious hotspot, perhaps make the user install a certificate, and bam, they have data. So the coffee shop attack, I mean, Yeah, we're going to see a couple of those this year at least. If they're not, I will eat my hat.
Ha! And you have quite a nice hat on right now,
I
don't
do
you?
have quite a nice took on.
You've got a Sharks hockey hat on. All right, let's move on to attack number 6, which I think follows off on this. And we're going to see more cybercrime, aren't we? It's not going away anytime soon.
No, it's just increasing.
Yeah.
You know, I will be shocked if it decreases this next year. There's just more money being spent.
I'll be shocked if it decreases before 2020, frankly. Because, I mean, more and more governments are getting involved. The stakes are higher. There's more money to get.
That's right. I mean, if there was a prediction I could say I would bet money on, that's it.
Yeah. Now, an example was Target stores this week came out and said that they were, it was reported rather, that they're investigating the theft of data on 1 million plus credit cards from their physical stores. It's an example of what would appear to be a pretty major data breach.
Yeah, it definitely is. This reminds me of the attack 2 years ago on the craft store Michaels, where it was the credit card scanner that was attacked there. This seems like it's almost the same thing, where everybody that shopped at Target from Black Friday until I think yesterday, their information, their credit card numbers, everything can be compromised. You know, just because you're not online doesn't mean that the data isn't being sent and you're completely safe.
Yeah.
This is going to be a big one. I'm not going to predict that it's going to be worse this next year, but we're definitely going to see more of it as more data gets transferred, as criminals see that there's money to be made. There's a market for it, especially buying and selling other people's credit card information.
Well, related to this, I think we're going to see what we're calling chain of trust attacks, where a company might fortify itself and its networks quite well. It might even fortify its employees' mobile devices fairly well. But partners and contractors are going to be the vector into the network. So partners bringing their own devices into the network, contractors as well bringing their own computers or connecting over VPNs or bringing their mobile device and connecting to the internal networks.
Yeah, to me, this sounds a lot like almost like a BYOD for multiple enterprises connecting together. It all comes down to trust, folks. We have to make sure that if you allow someone on your network and access to your data, that they should be allowed data and that they're following proper security practices. So someone needs to go through, make sure your partners are following best practices. Otherwise, you're just bringing another random box and hackers right into your network.
Well, I think there's also ways that you can, for example, deploy mobile security products like the ones that we make here at Marble onto those contractor and partner devices, and then not allow them onto the network unless those devices scan clean, and that the apps on those devices scan clean.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that is such a good idea. Getting everyone on a secure platform is very important. Otherwise, you don't know who's connecting.
So let's look at our trend number 7 for 2014. More large-scale password thefts.
Yep, this last year we saw Adobe and there was the Cupid dating sites. This isn't going to stop. I think this is going to increase simply because people are seeing that not everyone follows best practices for storing passwords. The treasure is that much richer, so people are going to go after it that much harder.
Yeah, and I think with the increased use of all the cloud services we're using, both as companies and as individuals, plus all the apps we're using, password management is just getting more and more difficult for the individual. They've got so many more all the time. It's ripe pickings. Well, on to prediction number 8, critical infrastructure attacks. Now, you believe, Ryan, that in 2014 we are going to see at least one pretty important attack against critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I do. The last couple of years we saw Stuxnet, which was weaponization of malware against the Iranian enrichment facilities. I don't want to sound like the harbinger of doom and gloom, but I would not be surprised. And in fact, I predict in the next year there's going to be an attack on the electricity or water grid within a first world country. It's coming down to a point where something's going to happen.
Well, and as the Internet of Things expands, the Internet of Vulnerabilities expands dramatically too, doesn't it?
It does. It's basic entropy. The complexity of the system increases, so does entropy, and this is definitely, somebody's going to get attacked.
All right, let's move on to our final two predictions for 2014. Number 9, more NSA revelations.
Oh, man. The Supreme Court just came out and they said that the NSA was breaking the constitutional rights of American citizens. They were overreaching a bit. That's a big deal. The NSA is appealing that. So we're going to see more revelations and them defending their position in the courts and the media. And I actually don't think many people are going to be very surprised by what comes out of it. I think most people now think that all the information is getting slurped up and being analyzed, and I think there's going to be some proof that that's actually happening.
Well, I predict that there will be increased adoption of privacy tools and services by consumers and by businesses. Furthermore, I think that NSA and privacy types of policies, anti-spying, will become checklists increasingly by chief information security officers for network services that they're purchasing, for cloud services. For example, I've been asked in recent months now about how our cloud-based services are protected against this level of spying. Now, it's not a major buying point yet, but it's starting to come up on CIO and CSO checklists.
You're right in that it will come up in checklists, but unless there's a little bit more transparency into what the NSA does, how they get information, they're just going to continue to iterate and make stuff better. They are the world's premier spying organization. I think that's a tall order.
Well, Ryan, it's time to move to one of our favorite pet areas of cybersecurity and what's going on the net. Our 2014 predictions for Bitcoin.
Oh my gosh. So China, the big topic conversation for 2013 at the end of the year was China said you cannot use Bitcoin as a currency within China. And we saw the value of Bitcoin drop roughly 60% at the very low. And then I think it's normalized to about 40% as of today.
Well, avid listeners will recall from last week's podcast that Bitcoin had dropped from about $1,200 down to about $800. And as of time of recording, just a week ago, it was at $990, bouncing around the $1,000 mark. There were more comments from the Chinese government this week. Denmark issued some statements warning consumers about the risks. They've also been seeing statements from the United States government, the UK government, and some other European governments saying, well, while we don't consider it a currency, we consider it an investment product. Therefore, we're going to look at taxing Bitcoin gains as capital gains. Now, what I find is interesting is that Bitcoin today, as we're recording this podcast on the 19th of December, hit a low of $522, but it's trading right this moment at $695. So my prediction is going to be dramatic volatility in Bitcoin prices, although an overall trend towards increasing prices.
Okay, I agree with you for a bit. I think it's going to increasing. I wouldn't say that I'm going to put my kids' college money into Bitcoin quite yet. Although,
if only you'd done it in January.
If only
of
I'd done it in
2013.
January. I know. Then I could have bought myself a Tesla.
You could have bought a small university.
Exactly. How high it goes, I'm not going to make any predictions. I don't know.
Well, I still maintain that Bitcoin will hit $10,000 within 2 years from now.
Within 2 years?
Yeah, that's my prediction. I do also predict that there will be far more thefts of Bitcoin in 2014. In our last podcast, we computed public disclosures of theft, and it was over $122 million worth of Bitcoins had been stolen as of last week, and about another $170 million had been seized by the U.S. government, $170 million worth. So there was $284 million worth of Bitcoin at last week's prices had been lost or stolen. I think it's a lot easier to steal Bitcoins from people than it is to mine them, for example, or to take currency risks buying them and hoping it goes up in such a wildly fluctuating market. My other thought on this is that there will be more people in the market in buying and selling things, looking at it as an investment product. It was on NBC News last night, a big expose on it. And I'm seeing less tech-savvy people getting into Bitcoin. In fact, at the farmer's market last weekend, I saw 2 vegetable stands who would take payment in cash or Bitcoin.
Man, you can mine the Bitcoin. You can even grow it now. There's a growing conversion of it. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think one of the big things that's going to come up is in March, when the complexity increases, it's going to become more and more difficult for people to mine their own coins. So it's going to take more money to build the proper rigs to be able to get a good return on investment. So yeah, that effort is going to be directed somewhere else. If your prediction is right, that means Mt. Gox will, if trading at the current rate, will be trading $50 billion a year. That's a lot of money, and anyone that wants to get money easily is going to take that as an attack.
Yeah.
They're going to go after that cash.
Well, the other thing you mentioned was miners, and these are the people that run the big cryptographic hashing engines out on the net that make Bitcoin work and that are basically creating them out of cryptographic effort. And one thing I also know is going to happen is there are a number of hardware companies entering the market with very fast Bitcoin mining ASICs that are going to change the dynamics of the mining game considerably. There will be more amateurs who have $5,000 to spend to get into the mining game, but there will also be companies investing $5 or $10 million in mining hardware on a constant basis to keep up and make those rigs profitable.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be a targeted attack on some of those mining operations themselves to divert the money.
Absolutely. I think you could certainly see that. And lastly, of course, in the Bitcoin market, we will see much more regulation and taxation. To me, one of the big things about Bitcoin was you can't have a monetary system without the government getting their cut. Who's going to pay for the firemen? Who's going to pay for the policemen? Well, they get to pay the piper. All right, well, that wraps it up for our 2014 predictions for security, cybercrime, and cybercurrency. Thanks for joining us this year, and everybody have a great holiday season and a great new year, and we will be back with another podcast in January.
Yep. Happy New Year, everybody.